All right. Guys, my name is Brent and I'm a heroin addict. It is such an honor to speak at the HA World Convention. When I got sober, one group existed in the Southeast. It was Ground Zero, and which was not that long ago. I don't say this to be like I'm such an old timer. I just want to give you all a real idea of how young this fellowship is. So when I got sober, there was one meeting in Alabama, Ground Zero. Shortly after that, the second meeting in the Southeast, the fourth on the East Coast started, and that was Smackdown, which is in Atlanta. They meet tonight at 8 in North Atlanta, and that was it. That was the only HA out here. This is a brand new thing, and in my short 9 years, I have watched this spread throughout the Southeast. I mean, we've got New Orleans here. We've got Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama. I mean, we have people from all over the nation, but just to watch the Southeast, I have had the opportunity to watch multiple areas form, regions form in the Southeast, and it's been an incredible experience. So I can only tell my story the way I remember it, and if you did drugs like me, you don't remember a lot of it. My story starts on July 27th of 2012. So July 27th, 2012, I awoke again at a mental institution. And this would have been my, I think, 12th stint there. No shoelaces, no belt, not a lot of good recollection of how I ended up here, but back in a mental institution. And the reason I was there was, I guess drug addiction is a mental health issue, but the reason I was there was my loving and somewhat codependent mother. No matter how hard I tried to push her away, she always ensured I had the most minimum health insurance. And so that bought me the opportunity to be locked up, no shoelaces and no belt for 4 days. That's what I had. That was the recovery opportunity. And so I was in such bad shape. I weigh about 185 pounds. I was in such bad shape. I weighed 120 pounds. And when I tried to get out of bed, I immediately collapsed because I was so malnourished and dehydrated from living on the streets for so long. I had entirely lost touch with reality. And I started to kind of relive, like, how did I get here? How did I get here again? And, most of the last year had been a blackout. And I didn't really know what to do. So I started calling people around and no one would answer. No one really wanted to talk to me. And there was this one guy who was a manager at the halfway house that I got kicked out of. And he was willing to talk to me. And the reason I reached out to this guy, his name was Chicago Mike. That's what we all call him. I mean, he's in the South, Chicago, Chicago Mike. And the reason he was willing to speak to me was because he truly believed in the responsibility statement. And the reason I wanted to talk to him was he was that, excuse the language, jackass who would always quote the big book at me. And like 12th time in a mental institution, it might be time to consider some of that. And I was no stranger to the rooms. I mean, I've been in and out of the rooms for 6 or 7 years, right? I had a multitude of white key tags and silver chips and all that, but I never really wanted to take a look at that book. To me, being a homeless heroin addict, 2012, I didn't really understand what a proctologist and a stockbroker in the 30s knew about my heroin addiction. And that was like a recurring theme with me, is that me being a heroin addict often meant I was, in my mind, pushed out of other rooms. In my mind, pushed out of other rooms. So, I started calling him and he was like, well, let's review. What happened? You had 6 months a year ago. What happened? How'd you get here? And I started thinking back to that. And I'd been in a sober living a year before that in beautiful Bessemer, Alabama. Yeah. These guys know. And so I've been in Bessemer, Alabama, not a place to be at night, and not at all. And beautiful. And so I had been there for 6 months, and I was very good at connecting with people who were working with program, hanging out with people who worked a program, and being involved with service with people who worked a program. I was not good at working a program. That was the thing that I always had a hold up about. And so to a large degree, I can honestly say I had managed to stay abstinent, dry, for 6 months. 3 days short of 6 months. And, I thought I was doing great, right? I had a job. I had a $30,000 car I bought with no money down and no credit. Highly recommend that to anybody. And life seemed to be going well. And I remember I was giving a ride to 3 guys that actually started that meeting, Ground Zero. I was giving a ride. They were newcomers. They had just moved in the halfway house. And I always tried to reach out to the heroin addicts. To me, like, the heroin addicts were the people I always wanted to be around. And so I was giving them a ride. We were going to the store, and I made this statement: nothing can make me shoot heroin today. I said it as honest and sincere as I could. Nothing can make me shoot heroin today. And then I got a phone call from the job that I was so proud of that I'd missed a shift. And I had to drop them off and get ready and rush down there real quick to try to keep my job. And the job was really important to me because the job was what gave me some sense of fulfillment and purpose, but it also paid for the car that I felt was really my accomplishment in sobriety, that I bought a car with no money down and no credit. And and so I rushed to this job. I talked to him, and I'm a professional server. I work in high-end restaurants. They sat me down. They were like, "This is unacceptable. You can't do this kind of stuff. We're not going to fire you, but we have to take some action. You're going to be suspended for a week." And I'd called my sponsor before I'd gone in there, which I hadn't talked to him in like 2 months. And I called him, and we kind of ran through this whole thing. It's like, worst case scenario, you got money, you live in a halfway house, they're not going to kick you out. Like, they're not going to do that to you. You'll be fine. You'll be okay. Suspended for a week. So I walked out, and I went to call my sponsor, and suddenly the thought occurred. So I had this real good friend named Tyler I'd known for years, and Tyler might be doing better. It'd been like 6 months. We hadn't talked in a while, so I figured I'd give Tyler a call. And called him up, and Tyler was in fact not doing any better. He was progressively worse with his addiction. But he was waiting on a man that I think many of us have met named D. And he said, I was like, well, look, man, I've had a good run with this like sobriety thing. It's been 6 months, but it's getting old. I can be there in 30 minutes. How does that sound? And he was like, no. He'll be here in 15 minutes. He was, in fact, an hour late. He'll be here in 15 minutes. And so I broke every traffic law I could in that $30,000 car that I put no money down on to get there in 15 minutes and wait for 45 minutes for this boy to be there. And, I bought a bag. I got my heroin. I did my, so I remember I did like half a tenth. And I fell out for a couple of hours, came back. And, I never really understood what this phenomenon of craving was. I never really understood how that applied to a heroin addict and how we had this allergy. But one thing when I look back, for me, heroin addiction creates this kind of sociopathy in me. I become very sociopathic. And so what I mean by that is like, you people become cardboard cutouts. You can help me or you can get out of the way. And I don't care outside of that. I have no emotional attachment to any of you. So anyway, these good friends of mine I'd known for probably 10 years helped me get dope. I fell out. I did have a bag, and I realized that if I were to do the rest of this, I would probably die. Not that I necessarily feared that, but I didn't really want to die on a bag. Like, that just didn't, I'm a professional heroin addict. Can't let one bag take me out, And they were like, well, if you're not going to do it, we can take care of that for you. And sociopathic me, I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, I could have relapsed any day of the week. I relapsed on a Wednesday. And so I had the boys in Bessemer, they know, Wednesday. I had 2 mandatory meetings I had to be at with 60 guys on Wednesday night. And so I thought about it, and I was like, well, maybe I could give it to them. And I was like, dope ain't free. And so I walked into the bathroom of their apartment, and I flushed that shit. I was like, no, dope ain't free. And but they were cardboard cutouts. And then I got in the car and I started driving. And I remember vividly slapping myself in the face as I'm driving back to the halfway house for a mandatory. I think I'm going to make it through the mandatory meeting, but I'm slapping myself to stay awake while I drive a car. And so I drive back, and I go through the first meeting, and I think it went well. It was like I don't remember a lot of this, right? And as far as I remember, it was an AA style meeting, right? So we just did a 12-step meeting, no issues, people spoke. Thank God I chose not to speak. And we were done. I was like, damn, I'm gonna get away with this. And then we went to the Big Book study. And now the Big Book study, we broke into smaller groups, and we each took a turn reading out of the book. And my turn came. Now, I don't know what y'all are like when you get high. Some people, I know they like to sit in a corner and nod out and be in a dreamland. That's not me. I want to be the center of attention. I want to make sure everyone hears what I have to say. And so, ironically, my part came, and it was the bedevilments, and which I had no idea what that was, right? And I just read it, and I went on this rant about how bold of a statement, that this was more important than seeing newsreel of lunar flight and being the 30s, and that was something that was impossible. And I apparently go on this whole rant while I'm high as a kite, and right in the middle of it, fortunately, a founding member of that first group stayed sober from that day on. And so he had the story to tell for years. And he said that I was out just long enough for everyone to look around and be like, Brent's high. Brent's happy. And he said, I came to, and I'm a professional heroin. I came to, and I didn't just finish. I picked up same syllable, same word, same sentence, finished my point, and gave him that smug look of, you're welcome. So they wanted to talk to me immediately. And, but, and that was the relapse, right? And I was really aggressive towards them. And I remember the guy who ended up being my sponsor, the one who would quote the big book to me, he searched my car. He was a bad cokehead. And I kept saying things like, Mike, this is heroin. If I wanted to hide a 10th gram of heroin in a car, you wouldn't find it. Now, I'm begging them to stay in the halfway house. And I'm making these statements to the guy. And, they locked me down. And I don't really remember the rest of the night. And I came to the next day, and I was awoken by Jamie M. and Tom B. And the people in Alabama will know that they can both be very stern, and they have saved probably every man here in Alabama's life at one point or another. And they were sitting at the end of my bed, and that's not a good thing to wake up to. They were the owners of the halfway house, well, a couple of them. And Tom, in a fashion that I really condone when dealing with drug addiction, immediately started making fun of me as soon as my eyes opened. And I deserve that. And but Jamie said something to me. He said, Brent, I know you've been a heroin addict for a long time, and you've gone in and out, and you've never really gotten time, but you've had 6 months now away from anything. And you're about to experience and understand something we call the obsession of the mind like you never have before. Yeah, I know you're thinking that, you're not dope sick, so you'll be fine. But you're only going to think about heroin until you get high again. I promise you that. And if you want any chance of living through this, you need to dive back in the program immediately, which I did not heed that warning. But he was right. For the next week, all I thought about, when they took my keys, they took my debit card, they took any way I had to get high, I sat there for a week and obsessed of how I'm going to get high. Who am I going to live with? What am I going to do? It even morphed, actually, into, I never really drank, right? But it morphed into how I never really drank. I'll just drink successfully. I'm not an alcoholic based on my experience, so I'll just start drinking. So the day I got my keys back, I literally woke up, I had all my stuff packed, I got my keys back, I loaded up my car, and I just dipped. They were like, where are you going? It was a friend's house. I just left, just gone. And I moved in my buddy, I started drinking, very professionally. And I drank like a gentleman for a total of 2 weeks, and it was a good experience for me because to that time, I would tell you I was not an alcoholic. I never really had alcoholic tendencies. And then I drank for 2 weeks, and I was a bad fish, right? Like, I was just drunk for 2 straight weeks, and it never worked. It never scratched the itch, right? It was never fulfilling. It was just like something to try to make it okay to exist until that 2 weeks was up and I put a needle in my arm. And then a blur of homelessness. I quickly got kicked out, and here I am, awake in the hospital again, no shoelaces, no belt. And, so something had happened when I was out on that run, and I knew that this HA group had existed now. And I had this real obsessive, and I kept talking to my sponsor, and I was like, look, man, I just need to get to the HA meeting. I don't know why. I just need to be in Bessemer Monday night at 8. I think if I can get there, I'll be okay. So we called said halfway house and asked if I could come back. And they said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I was like, well, I pay my rent. I was a nice guy. I mean, like, I didn't get into fights. Why? Well, maybe you don't remember some of the things you did after you left here. And they started naming people's names. And I said, so when he decided to relapse, who did he call? Yeah, he called me. Like, okay. When this guy decided to relapse, who did he call? I was like, yeah, he called me. All right, now you actually called this guy and talked with him about how he wanted to relapse, didn't you? And it's like, yeah, fair. I did in fact call that man first. And they were like, we're not, you can't come back. You're gonna have to prove to us you're serious before you can come back. And so instead I ended up what they called in Alabama at the time an SRP program. So I was with all the people who had left prison who were trying not to go back to prison. Yeah, right. And it was beautiful. And it was in Gate City, basically. It was across the street from Gate City. Yeah. I downgraded from Bessemer. It was impressive. Yeah, it's possible. And so it was a rough place. Like my first night there, which I guess was a real test of my sobriety. My first night there, I mean, they cold turkeyed me for 4 days. That's it. 4th day, I got out. And so I was extremely dope sick. I mean, Xanax, Coke, heroin. I was extremely dope sick. I was probably a seizure risk on some level. And I couldn't sleep, and I was staying up all night and just trying to process and, puking and all the, heroin withdrawal, we all know. And one of the guys came to me and he was like, look, man, I've got to get some sleep. I have liquid methadone in my room right now. I'll give it to you if you'll just go to sleep so I can go to work in the morning. 4 days. And I just kind of stopped for a minute and thought, I just need to get to that HA meeting. I just need to get to that HA meeting. And I said, no, I'm good. I don't want it. These guys were really pissed at me. It was really rough, but I turned it down. And then I found myself trapped in this place where like every night I watched my roommate, the silhouette of my roommate smoke crack in front of a street light before he came in. And then he would always be like, man, I got bad insomnia. You mind if I drink a beer to go to sleep? And I'm like, well, you're smoking crack. Of course you have insomnia, man. I mean, my God, And, but I begged and I pleaded, and finally they let me go back to beautiful Bessemer. So I went back, and the reason I was so obsessed with that place is one of those guys that I helped get high, a really good friend of mine named Blake, who I need to reach out to. He called me and he wanted to get high, and so I was like, sure, yeah, let's do this. And so I'm going to get him dope, and I think only an HA member can really understand this. While we're riding out there, he's like, if you ever decide to get sober again, we did something pretty cool like 2 months ago. We decided to start this HA meeting. I don't know if you ever heard of that. And I was like, what is HA? He's like, well, it's a 12-step group, but it's only for heroin addicts. It's a singleness of purpose here in Alabama. It's only for heroin addicts. Well, really? He's like, yeah, it's pretty cool. I think you like it. Like, well, what book do you read? He's like, the big book. I'm like, no. There's another AA trick. Yeah, I get you. No, I don't want that. He was like, well, I'm just saying, if you decide, again, we're driving to a dope dealer's house. If you decide to get sober again, you might want to check it out. It's in Bessemer, Monday at 8. So now I'm going back to Bessemer, and I just cannot wait. And to that point, my experience had been that in all the other fellowships, they tried really hard to help me. And my things that were internal in me, right? My disease of perception kept me from connecting to them. But I didn't know that, right? It's disease of perception. I don't know that. And I would go into these meetings and I would try to share about being a heroin addict and I'd be told I couldn't call myself that. Or I would share about, I would try to process crazy stuff that happened. I was trying to process, at one point, one of my buddies was shooting dope and he was like, it's kind of weak, should I do more? And I was like, of course you should do more. And he shot more dope and he fell out and I stole his dope. And he called an ambulance and I watched him die. And again, I'm doing heroin, it's sociopathic. I did not process that until I got sober, or tried to. I didn't process my father's death and funeral that I didn't remember because I literally left his funeral. I got $1,000 from my sister from his money, left in the middle of his funeral with my other sister, copped dope, came back and blacked out of being a pallbearer. I didn't remember any of that until I got sober. And so I would share this stuff in meetings, and I would have people come up to me afterwards and like, look, we don't really condone that. And I'm like, well, I also don't condone blacking out at your father's funeral. What do you mean? And like, no, this junkie pride. You can't try to one-up people's shares. What? Was this I didn't think this was a competition. I just, and they would try to tell me that like that was stuff for a sponsor, and that the really dark stuff you needed to keep internal and talk to your sponsor, not share at a meeting. And I'm like, but that's not the dark stuff. That's just a Tuesday of being a heroin addict. Like I have not shared any dark stuff by any means. And so when I finally made it to this HA meeting, I figured it was probably going to be like that, right? Like I was going to walk back in and somehow someone was going to make me edit. But no, I mean, these guys like Joey and Lee, and they were, my name's Lee, I'm a heroin addict. My name's Joey, I'm a heroin addict. And like it was the first time I could just say that. And it was the first time I just shared. Like I didn't edit it, I didn't change a word, I didn't have to manipulate anything I said. I just shared what happened. And they laughed. They didn't think I was trying to one-up them. In fact, my stories did not compare to some of these guys, honestly. And I felt this connection, right? Like I felt safe for the first time. But the problem is that only lasted in the short term. And I remember I'd feel really connected with these guys, and then I'd walk out of the meeting, and then I'd feel disconnected. And I went back and forth doing that for a few months. I dragged a couple people with me. And like and this is such an HA thing, one of like the pivotal moments when I felt accepted in the fellowship is they would play spades every night. And they invited me to play spades with them, which of course, I obviously knew how to play spades. And like, I was accepted. I was one of them. And I bought into this thing. And they were like, how'd you get sober? And the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, was a sponsor. Okay, well, I'll do that. Apparently works for heroin addicts. And I think that's a role that we play well. For someone like me, and not all heroin addicts are like this, but for someone like me, I really struggled with believing that this was the solution, right? Because when I read this book, I barely drank. When I read this book, it was really hard for me to connect to. But then I had heroin addicts who would sit there and they would explain to me, like, I would read obsession of the mind, allergy of the body, phenomenon of craving. I'm like, that makes no sense for a heroin addict. And they were like, well, you experienced obsession of the mind, right? You were locked in that halfway house for 2 weeks and all you thought about it, right? And then you tell me that when you shoot dope, you do crazy things like steal, and you have no connection with people around you, right? You have a different reaction from other people. And then one of them said to me, phenomenon of craving, you don't understand that. And I was like, no, it's not like I do heroin and I just like do more and more. You get off sick or you get high. And it's like, all right, have you ever tried to save heroin for the morning so you're not dope sick? Yeah. And it's like, I got a better one for you. Have you ever shot your wash knowing you'll be extremely sick in the morning without it? Well, yeah, every night. That's phenomenon of craving. That's what Dr. Silkworth's talking about. And so I started to me, that was the first step, right? I started to really understand. It wasn't that bad things happen. It was the real understanding of my disease and my addiction. I even started thinking back as we went through the step process of the first time I really, really got high. So I'm one of these people that I really thought I was a victim. I was not a bad kid. Like I did fairly well in school. Like I seemed adjusted all right, But I got prescribed Lortabs when I broke my thumb and something happened and it was fantastic. And then I had a spontaneous lung collapse and they gave me IV morphine and something even better happened. And so when I had the opportunity to try to get high on my own for the first time, I ran with it. I had some buddies bring over some Lortabs. Parents were out of town, we threw a party, and I took 3 Lortabs, which I thought was wild, That's like, they asked me how many I wanted, it was like 3. There's no way I could eat more than 3. And that's really, really funny to think about today. And I took my 3 Lortabs, and like, they were all having fun, and they were doing all these other drugs, and I immediately said to him, like, can we get more? Can you call your guy? I'm like, he's out. Can you call another guy? Like, yeah. Well, call him now. Like, why are we talking? Call people right now. And they started calling people, and nobody had Lortabs for sale that night that we knew. And suddenly the thought occurred. That my stepfather's prescribed Lortabs. There's hundreds of Lortabs in this house. And hundreds, right? Like I could have shared. But that's not how this works, right? And so as soon as that thought occurred, I was like, guys, I'm getting tired. I don't feel good. I think we need to end this. No, well, we're having this. I was like, no, we need to end this. Y'all need to go home. And I kicked these people out of my house. I went into my stepfather's stuff. I stole, I don't know how many Lortabs. I don't know how many I immediately took. I passed out, I puked, I hit my head on a sink. It was one of the best nights of my life. And I was totally alone. And like that was the theme, like these opiates would make me steal and they would make me isolate every time. So I started to have a real good understanding of my disease. And we started going through this process, and I was raised in this kind of weird home where, so my mother was a Lutheran, or no, my mother was a Methodist, my grandmother was a Lutheran, and my father was kind of an atheist. Like, mom would be like, this is how the world started, and dad went, no, that's not right. Like, no, let me tell you like the scientific thing that happened. And so when I came into the rooms, I got sober in Birmingham, Alabama, Bible Belt. Like, there's 4 churches right in front of the entrance of my neighborhood, Bible Belt. And I really didn't think I could get sober unless I could find a God. And I really didn't believe that. And fortunately, this time, things lined up and I found a really good sponsor. And we didn't just read We Agnostics. My original copy of We Agnostic, or copy of the big book, has criticisms of We Agnostics written all through it. Like, I was sick. I was not ready for that. Chris knows. And but I had a really good sponsor who took me through the 12 and 12. And he was like, man, this is a beautiful chapter. And I want you to just go into this with an open mind. The premise of this is here's a sponsee who cannot get sober because they're an atheist. And here's a sponsor who surmounted that. They've gone through it. And not only are they going to share their experience, they're going to share the experience of other people they've seen in the room. Some of them extremely religious. Some of them turned away from God. Some of them who are too intelligent for God. And I just want you to read through this and identify who you are. And it was the first time that really opened my mind to it. But more importantly, he showed me this one thing. And I promise you, I did not come here to read y'all the second step in the 12 and 12. But on page 26, he showed me something that I really firmly believe in. And it's these 3 points about the second step. And it opened my mind to the fact how you get sober. First, Alcoholics Anonymous does not demand that you believe anything. All of its 12 steps are but suggestions. Second, to get sober and stay sober, you do not have to swallow all of step 2 right now. Looking back, I find that I take it piecemeal myself. Third, all you really need is a truly open mind. Just resign from the debating society and quit bothering yourself with which came first, the hen or the egg. Again, I say, all you need is an open mind. And I thought about that. And that 6 months I had before, spent a lot of time arguing about which came first, the hen or the egg. And it didn't really matter, right? Like, that's not what was important here. It was like, was I willing to go forward with this process? And like, I bought in, I went in, and we were like, look, man, let's do this inventory process. He was like, yeah, I need you to go through. And I was like, I'm not resentful. Like, I wasn't resentful, man. I didn't even care about these people, right? Like, how am I resentful about any of this stuff? Like, just trust me. And I was like, this has nothing to do with me getting high. He's like, just trust me. Just do it. And so I started writing names and why I was mad at him and whatever. And every once in a while I'd be like, this is crap. I'm not doing this anymore. None of this is important. And Mike had a picture of me from I just got arrested. And he would show that to me every time. And I'd be like, I think this is important. So anyway, I wrote through, I ended up writing down 200 names, 660 resentments. And I found, my poor sponsor, God, he should not answer that phone call when I was in that hospital. And I realized I was really resentful, and we went through this process. And in doing so, when it was all said and done and we did a 5th step, I learned something that I'd never understood to that point. I understood this concept of these character defects. And so, like, for example, we go through this 5th step and he's like, I kept being resentful at people because they would snub me and push me away from them. And I couldn't understand why. And so we worked through this process, and he said, here's the deal, man. You would try to show these people how cool and valuable you were to them. And in doing so, you would step on their toes. You become an arrogant prick. And they retaliate by pushing you away. And you try that much harder to reinforce to them, no. I need to be in your life. I'm important. Please do not leave me alone. And you kept doing this until finally you were alone, and you would stick a needle in your arm because you couldn't process that. You would get a job and buy a car with no money, with no credit, with a payment you couldn't afford, and a job you had to have. You had to work or else you were going to lose the car that was so important to you. And if any of that fell apart, you couldn't process that, so you'd stick a needle in your arm. You were not a victim. And in my personal story, and I don't know about yours, in my personal story, I was not a victim. And that was a wild experience. And we went through that 5th step process, and I walked into this room. I went back to my new home group, Breaking Point, and I had this wild experience where for the first time I walked in a room, and I don't talk about this a lot anymore, but so my father was an electrical engineer who retired and started a prostitution ring. And upon his death, my father owned the largest prostitution ring in Alabama. And so I did marketing for him. I did all the dealing with the yellow pages, pre-internet really, and dealing with the yellow pages and everything. And so I had crazy ideas. I mean, I grew up around that. I had wild ideas of how the world worked, not just women, sex, money, business, how you deal with people, how you deal with people threatening your life. I mean, I found my father hogtied in his house where people had done home invasions and stuff, and that was just teenage years. And that didn't seem traumatic at the time. And so we went through this 5th step process, and I went to the meeting, and it was the first time I walked into a meeting, and I wasn't really aware that I did this, but to that point, I would walk in a meeting and you're either my ally or you're my enemy. And I needed to know where everyone stood. And what you shared, it wasn't what you said, it was what was my relationship with you. If you had been mean to me or if we had conflict, everything you shared was crap. If in fact it was a bunch of people like that, it was a sick meeting, right? And if it was a bunch of my friends, it was a good meeting. And with women, I would inventory in my head who I wanted to sleep with, in what order and why. And I didn't even know I was doing that stuff till I did a 5th step. And for the first time I walked in the meeting and all that was gone. And I sat in this meeting and I heard a clear message from everyone who shared. They were all my friends and allies, right? They were my brothers and sisters in HA. And I realized how much of my perception was affecting the way I was acting in this world. It was the first time I had real freedom. It was the first time I had real humility as defined in the 12 and 12. I think I'm getting short on time, so I want to just tell one last story. When I got sober, I was in an IOP program for a bit, and there was this woman who I always thought was an alcoholic. Ironically, I later found out she was a really bad crackhead, and she didn't want to admit that. But she had this whole thing. She was like, "Look, this is terrible. I go to these meetings, and if my son gets married, I won't be able to drink wine at their wedding, and what a terrible curse this is. And I'll just obsess about this all the time." And the counselor read the 10th step promises, right? Cease fighting anything or anyone, even heroin. This time, sanity's return. Haven't sworn off. Problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. It's this almost immunity to heroin, right? And he read these 10-step promises off, and it was all, in alcohol. And I went to my sponsor and was like, "Is that real? Do we actually experience heroin? he didn't do heroin. Cokehead, did you experience that?" 100%. Absolutely. When you get to that point, you will be able to look at it, be around it, and not even think of it. The problem will be removed. It will not exist for you. You will not need to be cocky nor afraid. Okay? That was worth going through it. At 6 months sober, a really good friend of mine that I used to get high with, who had gotten sober, his name was Scott, and Scott had really bad dental work done, and bad surgery, and they told him, "You cannot take painkillers." But in his mind, he was like, "Well, it'd be different, right? Because it's not heroin, right? It's hydrocodone, and it's mixed with Tylenol at the end of the day." And then it's Tylenol. And then I'm not actually taking it to get high. I have a good reason, right? I'm just going here to see if I can get a prospect for a car sale, right? And I'm just going to put the whiskey and milk with a sandwich. I won't even be on an empty stomach. It'll be different. And he had the surgery, and he started taking the Loratab, and he took 1, and he took 3, and he took a bottle, and within 3 hours, he stuck a needle in his arm. And we hadn't heard from Scott in 3 days. And this literally is one of my closest friends. I grew up with this guy. I shot dope with this guy, I smoked crack with him, the kind of things that we consider bonds. And I love this guy to death. And my grand sponsor called me, and he didn't even think about it. He was just like, hey, have you heard from Scott? And I'm like, no, but I'm pretty sure he's probably in his mom's basement. Like that's where he goes. He's probably got his weenie dog there. Let me just ride down there and check. I know his family real well. They probably won't even ask me a question if I walk in the house and go down there. It would be normal for me to go down there. He's like, yeah, just go check on him. So I'm going to a place that I actively got high for years. And I don't suggest this to anyone, but at the time I wasn't thinking of it like that. And so I went there by myself, and I went down there, and he was asleep, passed out, and the dog, rah, 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 and just like it, normal life at Scott's mom's basement. And I wake him up, and I'm like, hey, man, what happened? He tells me this whole thing, his whiskey and milk story, which he didn't even, it literally sounded like he was saying Jim's story. It was wild to sit here and listen to someone say it. And he tells this whole story, and I'm like, look, let's call Scott. Or let's call Jamie. Let's see if we can get you back in, Scott. And we called Jamie, and we talked to him for a while, and he's like, well, he can come back. He has to get in a car right now, and you have to bring him back immediately. If he's willing to do that, he'll do it. All right, cool, let's go. And Scott's like, man, I'm all about it. Here's the deal. I got a bunch of caked heroin in a spoon, and I can't just throw that away. And I don't want to do it, and I don't know what to do. Can you handle it? Oh, yeah, give me the spoon. So he hands me a spoonful of heroin. And I take it, and without thought, I go to the sink, and I wash the spoon out. And I remember the thought of, I got black soot all over my hands. I can't get it off. How am I going to explain this when I get back to the halfway house? That was my only concern, right? How am I going to get the black soot off my hands? Got him in the car, we got him back. They got him back to the rehab, and he went in and out for a couple of years, and he's been sober for a hot minute now and helped save many people's lives. And when I got back and I told that story to my grand sponsor, he was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. If we can meet right now and talk about this. Are you okay? Are you shaky? And I was like, no, not at all. It was like, did I not so you touched heroin with your bare hands? So, yeah. Did you not think about getting high? No, my only concern was taking one of my brothers in heroin addiction back into the rooms of HA. That was my only thought the whole time I was there. And my experience has been, if I stay in the middle of this and I do whatever I can to help us bring still suffering heroin addicts out of their self-imposed crisis, their misery of heroin addiction, as long as I do that, I have experienced those 10-step promises. I have that position of neutrality, safe and protected. I have not even sworn off. The problem has been removed. It does not exist for me. That has been my experience so long as I stay in touch and in the middle of Heroin Anonymous. Thank you so much. It's been an honor.